one of our cornerstones of a visit to Kennedy Space Center. It's not only touring Kennedy Space Center, but meeting someone who's been to space, lived there, and has come back to tell us all about it. We have Space Shuttle. I'm Roger Krebs. And if you would like to say a few words about your journey into space, and then we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A before we whisk you off to Space Shuttle. I mean, and the shuttle launch experience.
Okay.
Take it away.
I grew up in the hills of Tennessee. And way before they had, we didn't have TV, computers, any of that stuff, of course. And so my career choices, after reading a lot of books, turned out to be an explorer. I went to see the movie Destination Moon when I was about 10 years old. And at the end of it, it said, this is the end of the beginning. And I thought, whoa, I want to be part of exploring this new frontier. First time I've seen that, they're cool. And so when I got out, since there weren't any space programs when I got out of, when I was in high school, and I tried to get in the Navy to be a fighter pilot, and I'm colorblind, so when I got to the physical, they said you can't be a pilot. And I tried the Marines, and they said we don't want you. Tried the Air Force, and they said we don't want you. Then NASA was formed, and they started recruiting people to go to the moon. So I started applying for that. And 17 or 18 years after never hearing anything from them, I called down there and I said, hey, you know, we're not going to the moon anymore, but I want to be part of this shuttle thing, and yada yada. And they checked my record and they said that I was so colorblind they just threw my application in the trash and didn't bother wasting paper to let me know. And then when I was 40 or almost 40, I found out about the payload specialist position. And the really cool thing about that is you can be colorblind, and so I started applying for that. And 17 years later, I finally got picked. So I was 56 almost when I got picked. And it took me 35 years to finally get to go. We went up in April of '97, lost a fuel cell, had to abort the mission and come back in the minimum duration. So we landed here at the Cape on the fourth day. And they came out and said, we're getting ready to build a space station. We wonder if you guys would be guinea pigs. We think we're going to be flying crews pretty often. And we want to see if you can withstand the rigors of a quick turnaround. So they turned, that's good. Of course we could do it. And not really that rigorous, I don't think, to go into space. John Glenn was 77 when he went, and he did all right. So anyway, we all said yeah, and the whole crew got to go back up 88 days later on STS-94. So that's about it. But what I did before I got to fly was I was a scientist at NASA Langley, and I worked on material science and semiconductor materials and stuff like that. And then I moved to NASA headquarters as a chief scientist for the microgravity science lab, or microgravity science program, and was in that position when I finally got picked. And then I came back and I was life and microgravity science as chief scientist for a while, and then I was a space station chief scientist, and real lucky to get all those jobs. And you can Google and get all that. There's no need to go into that. All right, any questions?
So altogether, how many times?
I flew twice.
Twice.
Just the 2 times, yeah. Pretty lucky for a payload station. But I think 4 or 5 of them, I think, have flown twice, other than myself and Greg. So 7 of us altogether got to fly twice. First time 4 days, second time 16 days.
You know, and this is the whole. This man has, in my opinion, the most inspirational story about becoming an astronaut. I mean, there are so many astronauts, and they'll tell you, there's very few that get accepted into the program on the first go-round. But never say. This is if you want something, put your mind to it. You can do it.
I think I thought Francis Bayer was an option.
Right. And I think that's also the magic of Kennedy Space Center. It's, you can't walk on the moon, you can't live and work in space. You know, it's all about doing that. How can we do that in our lives?
We were up there the first time and we had a press conference. The way they did this, they didn't want to put it over the air that we had aborted the mission and had to shut off one of the fuel cells. And so they sent our commander an email. Well, of course, CNN or somebody had already knew it, and they broadcast it all over the world. But our commander went to bed before he read his email. We were working 2 shifts, and so while he was in bed, we had this press conference. And about halfway through the press conference, one of the reporters said, "Well, what about this fuel cell problem?" And the guy that was answering the question said, "Oh, we got the greatest people in the world down there underground working on it. We're going ahead with the mission at normal pace, and everything's working great up here. We're sure they'll solve the problem, no problem." And we got off the interview, and I said, "Mike, what fuel cell problem they talking about?" He said, "I don't have any idea." He said, "You just always answer the question." And then we went to bed, and I woke up the next morning, and we had sleep stations, and they had a little door that you slide open to come out of your sleep station, and I slid out, and it was dark. And I thought, man, isn't that nice? They turned the lights off so we could sleep late. Then I started floating. We had a space lab back in the back, and I started floating through the tunnel back to the space lab, and it was dark in the space lab, and I thought, well, now that's not right. There's something wrong here. One of the guys came floating by, and he said, "We're going home. They had to abort the mission." And I said, "I'm not going home. I just got here." And sure enough, then when we saw the commander, he said, "Yep, they've aborted the mission. We're going home Tuesday." Well, when you get up there, you're on mission lapse time. And I didn't know what day it was. I didn't know when Tuesday was. I was really confused for a few minutes there trying to figure out how much more time we had. So we decided what we would do is just work off. I had trained, even though I was a payload specialist and chosen for material science and fluid physics and some of the other stuff, I had trained on everything since I'd been familiar with the scientists that were doing the programming and so forth. And that worked out real well because they started giving me a lot of experiments that I wasn't supposed to be trained on, but I was able to run them. And we ran at least one test on all the experiments we had on board, so we didn't know we were going back. So we wanted to get at least some data for everybody. And then when we got down and they said we were going back, the scientists could use that data that they got to reprogram some of the stuff for the second flight. It's such a quick turnaround, they didn't allow them to do much, but particularly the combustion science, they couldn't use software on the computer because the flames burned a lot longer than they thought they were going to. In fact, they flew that same piece of hardware on 107, and it burned for 90 minutes. What they do is they fill this little chamber with fuel, and then a vaporized fuel, and then they do a spark, and it forms this little thing called flame bomb. And they sort of reorient themselves in a pattern so that the oxygen diffusion is about the same to each of the droplets. And it sort of simulates the gravitational effect in an internal combustion engine burning the droplet burn. And then they would burn, and one of them burned over 90 minutes. And that was as long as the software was programmed for, even on 107. So on ours, they had programmed for 5 minutes, I think, or something like that. Because the most they'd ever done was a drop tower, so they had 2 seconds or 4 seconds of that. And you can't do it in the KSC 135 because even though you feel you can float, you're really still too much acceleration. You really need to be in a microgravity environment to get the flame off to be stable. And in fact, some of the time they would fly the shuttle around that particular piece of hardware, so you could keep the flame. They were great accelerometers. They could tell you exactly what was going on with the shuttle. Any questions about anything?
Any questions?
What about you, partner? You got a question? You want to be an astronaut? I'll tell you what, if you don't want to be an astronaut, I want you to start a technical firm, some sort of electronics firm or something, maybe a new Google or something. But you'd be rich enough to build your own rocket system like Elon Musk. And I want you to start a program called 100-Year-Old Men on the Moon. You remember my name? I want you to send me to the moon, all right?
So you go back.
I'm serious.
You go back in a minute.
Oh, yeah.
You go, no?
I can go every day for that. The first time we flew, I had space adaptation, and about 2/3 of us get that, and then the other third I wouldn't get live and having symptoms without it. And so it took me about a day and a half to get over that. And on the second flight, I had absolutely no symptoms at all. And so in 88 days, Your brain remembers it's okay to be in an environment where your eye and your ear don't agree. But people who usually fly more than one mission, it's months or years between flights, and they have the same symptoms, but it's not as severe, don't last as long. So, but 88 days, you could go every 3 months and just be fine all the time. I'm a little concerned about the where you just do a sound and rocket profile, and you're only there for 7 minutes. I think a lot of people are not going to do a repeat mission if they do it for 7 minutes. We'll see how that goes. On the vomit column, 20 seconds you can sort of stand at, then when you repeat it, that's why they call it the vomit column. But 7 minutes is a pretty long time. If you're not really, really careful about moving the head.
Is there any thoughts being up there day after day? You're claustrophobic and like, what? I really want to go back now, and it's obviously nothing you can do.
Well, I was working probably 15 hours a day, and so I was pretty busy. And I made a deal with the commander. I didn't have to sleep 8 hours, so I got a couple hours on each end to look out the window and stuff like that. And I thought, 16 days in a closet, that's going to be really crowded. It's going to get old.
Yeah.
But absolutely not. After I flew, I would love to go to the station and spend 3 to 6 months, something like that. Maybe even a year.
Wow.
Because even though you go to the same place every 4 days, it's a different time of day, it's a different sun angle, you notice different details. And getting 2 launches in a fairly close span is also, so the first time, your senses are just overwhelmed with so many new things going on. You're just looking around like this all the time, trying to catch all that. But the second time, you notice a totally different set of parameters than you do the first time. So if you get rich enough, you really need to fly twice.